What if one of the most important strikes in a modern war wasn't aimed at soldiers, missile launchers, or command bunkers but at a chemical plant? At first glance, that sounds almost insignificant. Factories can be rebuilt. Industrial equipment can be replaced. Smoke eventually clears. But in modern warfare, the most valuable target is often not the weapon itself. It's a system that allows new weapons to exist tomorrow. That is why today's story deserves a closer look. Recent reports indicate that Israeli aircraft struck industrial facilities in southwestern Iran, including infrastructure associated with one of the country's major petrochemical complexes. Regardless of the exact operational details, the broader strategic question is far more important than the headlines. Why would military planners choose an industrial complex instead of another missile launcher? Why risk expanding a conflict over what appears, on the surface, to be a civilian manufacturing site? The answer lies in understanding how modern missile forces actually work. Most people imagine ballistic missiles as finished products sitting inside underground bunkers, waiting to be launched. In reality, every missile represents the end of an enormous industrial chain. Long before a missile reaches a launcher, thousands of separate components must pass through chemical plants, metal minus processing facilities, electronics manufacturers, testing centers, transportation hubs, and specialized assembly lines. Destroying launchers affects today's battlefield. Damaging the industrial network affects tomorrow's battlefield. Military planners have understood this principle for generations. During the Second World War, the light bombing campaigns gradually shifted away from simply attacking front-line forces. Instead, they targeted Germany's fuel production, synthetic oil facilities, rail networks, and industrial infrastructure. The objective was not merely to destroy equipment, it was to reduce Germany's ability to replace what had already been lost. Modern conflicts operate according to the same logic, although the technology has changed dramatically. Missile production depends on a surprisingly complex industrial ecosystem. Solid rocket motors require highly specialized chemical compounds. Guidance systems depend on precision electronics. Airframes require advanced metallurgy and composite materials. Even relatively small disruptions inside that supply chain can create production bottlenecks that take months or even years to overcome. This is especially true when access to imported machinery, replacement parts, or specialty chemicals is already constrained by sanctions or export controls. That is why industrial facilities occupy such a unique position in military planning. Unlike mobile missile launchers, factories cannot simply relocate overnight. Unlike underground storage sites, they often rely on extensive pipelines, power grids, transportation links, and specialized equipment that are extremely difficult to duplicate elsewhere. Even if physical damage appears limited, production schedules can be interrupted for extended periods while inspections, repairs, and safety certifications take place. From a purely strategic perspective, this creates a difficult calculation. Is it more effective to destroy 10 missiles today, or reduce the ability to produce hundreds over the next year? Increasingly, modern military planners appear to favor the second option. This reflects a broader evolution in warfare itself. Over the last several decades, advances in intelligence, satellite surveillance, and precision-guided weapons have made it possible to attack the economic foundations of military power with far greater accuracy than ever before. Instead of conducting massive area bombardments, modern air campaigns often focus on carefully selected nodes within a much larger system power distribution centers, logistics hubs, communications infrastructure, transportation corridors, and industrial facilities that quietly support military production. In many cases, these targets are interconnected. A chemical facility may supply materials to multiple factories. Those factories may support different missile programs. Transportation networks move finished components to assembly plants, while energy infrastructure keeps the entire process operating around the clock. Disrupting one part of that network can create ripple effects throughout the entire system. That is why analysts increasingly describe modern warfare as a competition between industrial ecosystems rather than simply opposing armies. The side capable of replacing losses faster often gains an enormous long-term advantage. History offers countless examples of this principle. Nations have repeatedly discovered that possessing advanced weapons is only half the equation. Sustaining those weapons through months or years of conflict requires resilient industry, reliable logistics, trained engineers, secure transportation, and continuous access to critical raw materials. Without those foundations, even sophisticated military equipment gradually becomes harder to replace. This is also why discussions about missile inventories can sometimes be misleading. Public attention often focuses on how many missiles remain in storage. Military planners, However, ask a different question: how quickly can new missiles be produced after existing stockpiles begin to decline? Those two numbers are rarely the same, and during prolonged conflicts, production capacity often becomes far more important than inventory alone. That shift in thinking helps explain why industrial infrastructure has become an increasingly prominent feature of modern strategic planning. Rather than measuring success solely by immediate battlefield damage, planners increasingly evaluate whether a strike changes the long-term balance of military production. In other words, today's target may not be chosen because it produces dramatic headlines tomorrow. It may be chosen because it influences what an adversary is capable of fielding 6 months from now. And that brings us to the larger question. If modern conflicts are increasingly becoming contests between industrial capacity, supply chains, and economic resilience, then factories may become just as strategically significant as missile silos, air bases, or command headquarters. The battlefield no longer begins where soldiers meet. In many cases, it begins hundreds of miles away inside manufacturing plants, logistics centers, research laboratories, and transportation networks that quietly sustain military power. Understanding that shift changes how we interpret events like this. The explosions themselves may last only a few moments. Their strategic significance, however, may unfold over months or even years. But there is another layer to this story that receives far less attention than explosions or satellite imagery. Industrial pressure is never just about destroying facilities. Its real purpose is to shape decisions. Every strike against critical infrastructure sends a message that extends well beyond the physical damage. It tells military planners, political leaders, and industrial managers that the cost of continuing a conflict may grow faster than their ability to sustain it. That is where deterrence becomes far more complicated. Traditional deterrence relied on the threat of retaliation. If one side launched missiles, the other side promised an even stronger response. For decades, much of the strategic balance in the Middle East rested on that principle. Each government calculated not only what it could do, but what it was willing to absorb in return. Today, however, the equation is evolving. Instead of asking, "Can you survive today's strike?" military planners increasingly ask, "Can your economy sustain another 6 months of this?" Those are very different questions. One focuses on immediate damage. The other focuses on long-term endurance. This shift reflects one of the defining characteristics of 21st century warfare. Modern conflicts rarely end because one side runs out of courage. More often, they end because one side begins losing the ability to replace equipment, maintain logistics, finance military operations, or protect critical infrastructure. Victory increasingly belongs to the side that preserves its industrial capacity while gradually reducing that of its opponent. That reality helps explain why governments invest enormous resources in protecting factories, energy facilities, transportation corridors, and electrical grids. These are not simply civilian assets. They form the foundation upon which military capability depends. Aircraft require fuel. Missile factories require electricity. Radar systems require replacement components. Repair depots require uninterrupted transportation. Remove enough pieces from that network, and even the most advanced military begins operating at reduced effectiveness. This is also why economic measures and military operations are becoming increasingly interconnected. Sanctions, export controls, shipping restrictions, and financial pressure rarely generate dramatic headlines. Yet over time they can reshape the strategic environment just as effectively as kinetic operations. Limiting access to precision machinery, advanced semiconductors, specialty metals, or chemical precursors gradually affects production schedules, maintenance cycles, and technological development. In many ways, economic pressure and precision strikes now function as complementary tools rather than separate strategies. One constrains industrial growth. The other selectively disrupts existing capacity. Together, they place sustained pressure on the same objective: long-term military production. Outside powers understand this dynamic extremely well. For countries that rely on stable energy markets, secure shipping lanes, and predictable global trade, every escalation in the Middle East carries consequences far beyond the region itself. Insurance costs for commercial shipping can rise almost immediately. Energy prices respond to uncertainty even before physical supply is interrupted. Financial markets begin pricing geopolitical risk long before governments announce new policies. That is why international attention often extends beyond the military exchanges themselves. The question is no longer simply whether missiles were launched. The larger question is whether the underlying industrial and economic balance has shifted in a meaningful way. If the answer is yes, then today's strike may influence decisions made months from now. This broader perspective also changes how we evaluate escalation. Many observers assume that every strike automatically pushes both sides closer to full minus-scale war. History suggests the reality is often more complicated. Sometimes carefully calibrated operations are designed not to trigger immediate escalation, but to reshape future bargaining positions. Military action and diplomacy frequently operate in parallel rather than in opposition. Pressure creates leverage. Leverage creates negotiations. Negotiations, in turn, may determine whether additional military pressure becomes necessary. Of course, none of this guarantees a peaceful outcome. History is filled with examples where governments believe they understood escalation only to discover that events move faster than expected. This calculation remains one of the greatest risks in any prolonged confrontation. A local incident, an intelligence failure, or a misunderstanding between commanders can quickly alter the strategic landscape. That uncertainty is precisely why military planners devote so much attention to preparation. Readiness is not simply about having aircraft available or missiles in storage. It is about maintaining logistics, protecting industrial output, securing transportation networks, and ensuring that production continues even under sustained pressure. Modern wars are won as much by factories and engineers as they are by pilots and soldiers. Perhaps that is the most important lesson emerging from recent events. The battlefield has expanded. It now includes manufacturing plants, research laboratories, supply chains, financial systems, energy infrastructure, and global shipping routes. Military strength can no longer be measured solely by the number of aircraft, tanks, or missiles a country possesses today. Increasingly, it must also be measured by how rapidly those capabilities can be repaired, replaced, and expanded tomorrow. That is why strikes against industrial infrastructure attract such intense attention among defense analysts. The immediate damage is only part of the story. The larger question is whether those strikes alter the long minus-term balance between production and consumption, between replacement and depletion, between resilience and exhaustion. And that is a question that cannot be answered overnight. The effects may take weeks to emerge, months to evaluate, and years to fully understand. As the situation continues to evolve, analysts around the world will be watching for several indicators: whether industrial production resumes quickly, whether supply chains adapt to new constraints, whether military inventories stabilize or continue to decline, and whether diplomatic efforts can reduce the pressure before further escalation becomes unavoidable. Those developments, not simply the explosions themselves, will shape the next chapter of this confrontation. Because in modern warfare, the most decisive battles are not always fought on the front lines. Sometimes they are fought quietly inside factories, across supply networks, through industrial planning, and within the economic systems that determine how long a nation can continue to compete. And that may ultimately become the defining story of this conflict: not who fired the next missile, but which side proves capable of sustaining the contest longer. The headlines will continue to focus on individual strikes, dramatic footage, and official statements. Those events matter, but beneath them lies a slower and far more consequential competition, one measured not in hours or days, but in production capacity, strategic endurance, and the ability to adapt under prolonged pressure. That is the contest worth watching, because long after the smoke clears, it is usually that contest that determines how history remembers the outcome.